All right, y'all. Well, welcome to another episode of the Blueprint Podcast. Today, we have my videographer, my producer of the podcast in the studio. What up?
What's up? What's up, man?
This is my boy Khalil. He's the one who's been shooting and editing probably like the last 4 episodes, I think. Yeah, we started coming over here in May, and so it's been really cool coming over to Kahlab Social. So since we shoot podcasts together, I feel like, hey, let's do a podcast on the power of podcasting and kind of what some of the results are and some of the back end things that people maybe don't think about in terms of how to produce a really good podcast. So yeah, man, you ready? Ready to get started?
Oh yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
Let's do it. It's cool. So typically I'm the person interviewing on the podcast, but we're gonna flip the script and like Khalil's gonna ask me questions. So y'all get to kind of hear a little bit of my experience in detail from podcasting. So let's get into it, man.
So for sure. So I think the first thing like I really want to ask is why podcasting? Like why did
Yeah.
you start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think I started for two reasons. One, because I was realizing that the leads for my marketing company, people needed to spend more time learning about me, right? And so I was posting a lot of short form content. So they like were coming on to sales calls and I was getting the sense that they really didn't trust me enough to really make that decision. So I was like, I need to figure out a way for people to spend more time learning about me. And podcasting is a perfect opportunity for that, right? The average podcast is 30 minutes to an hour. So if I could start getting people to watch longer episodes, learn more about me, learn more about my value, that was going to help me on the business side, on the sales side. And then number two, like I genuinely just want to build a platform to help people grow their businesses. And so part of my identity is like I'm a connector. So I'm kind of the bridge builder. And I feel like I had been occupying this space as kind of this short form guru guy. And I just feel like that wasn't me, right? And I was like, I need to go back to something that's more of me, and my passion and proficiency is content and interviewing, right? So I was like, let me do something that allows me to just be really like who I am. And that was podcasting, right? So I get the opportunity to like interview guests and find the gold in their stories and then show it to my audience, right? And connect people to the questions they have, to people who have the answers. And I don't have to be the one who has all the answers. I just have to be the one that connects them to it. And so podcasting has given me like great opportunity to do that. And it's been a lot of fun and just getting to like add value to people's lives, bro. And just help people just want to talk about what they're doing. And so me giving them that platform has been a lot of fun for a lot of folks. And it's actually just helped people with their businesses. Like they've gotten sales from coming on my podcast and people in my audience like working with them. So yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. So with that being said, like the architect network, so you kind of put all of this together.
Yeah.
Like there's different parts into it. So why that? And kind of break me through that. Like,
Yeah. So Architect is because I love doing my own podcast, but I also like producing other people's podcasts because like I said, I'm innately, guys, put something in me. I can find the gold in someone's story, right? And so I know there's a lot of other people who would be good at podcasting. And so I was like, well, how do I create a platform that allows me to produce my stuff, but also I could produce other shows? And so that's why I built out the network. And so we're actually going to launch our first show next week. So depending on when you see this, our first show is going to be dropping. And it was really cool to kind of help that host kind of craft the vision for their show and help them kind of create a roadmap for what it's going to be. So yeah, the network is really going to be more of the platform that really helps launch other people's shows, along with like my own content. And the purpose of the platform of the network is to help Christian entrepreneurs grow their faith community and their business. And so all the shows will either hit all three of those or one of the three. So it could be help you grow your faith, help you grow your business, or help you grow your online community, like separately, or it could be the show is kind of has a little bit of both, which mine has kind of a little bit of both. I interview people all over the map. So yeah.
So that's like kind of like the Swiss Army knife, right? So
Yeah.
like go to your network and you can learn something. You can grow, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It'll be really cool to see how it continues to play out because like right now, like we're in the early stages. We're almost at 300 subscribers. And so like I'm still trying out different topics to see like what our audience really starts to gravitate towards. So I think in the next 6 months, we'll figure out maybe a particular topic or one of those three pillars that people really, really like. And we'll kind of lean more heavily into that. But right now we're kind of just testing out, having fun and kind of just seeing what's going to come out of it.
Okay, for sure. So like so far, like what have you seen like people gravitate to the most?
Yeah, so like right now, like our best podcast was about social media. My friend Elena is a social media manager, and so we did a podcast with her. And that one's got like the most amount of views and most amount of engagement. I've seen a lot of impacts. We've done a lot of conversations around faith and business. And that also seems to be getting a lot of traction in terms of people really having a lot of questions about how to combine their faith with their business and how to do that ethically and actually how to actually do it really well in a non-cheesy way. So I think those topics have been particularly impactful. And this next season, we're going to do a lot more like we're going to do episodes where we're like out in the public and we're like doing things and then we're coming back to the studio. So I think that interactivity is also going to show us some things too.
Okay, sure, for sure. So like, since you're saying like you're switching up the scenery and stuff, so is it better to have like a live podcast or a pre-recorded podcast, or like how does like an audience kind of engage? With that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I think it's one of those things where I think you have to know like your own communication style because there's a ton of different ways to do podcasts. I mean, you can do interview style, you can do solo. Some people do like journalistic where they're like telling a story. Like that's where you hear like the crime, the true crime podcasts. So, like there's a lot of different ways to do them. Or like the live stream, like you said. So I think it kind of really depends on like how you like to communicate. Like I don't like the live episodes as much because like it's almost like being on the radio. Like you can't have any dead space. Like you got to fill that space, and it's like people coming on and off the stream, and I just feel like it's stressful for me. So I like to do the pre-recorded because you can edit it, you can rearrange it, you have time to like add other creative elements to it. So kind of just depends on obviously like number one, like kind of what you like to create, and then two, like what your audience responds to. So that's just like experimenting with different types, and that's why I'm experimenting with different types now. Right, we're gonna do some stuff out in the public, some stuff in the studio, some stuff both, you know what I mean? Different styles of guests, right? So you just kind of you experiment until you find what works for you and then what your audience gravitates toward.
So when it comes to that, there's like the visual component to it. There's also a ton of mistakes that you can make while like podcasting. So can you kind of walk me through that so I can understand?
Yeah. So I think there's three big mistakes I see people doing when it comes to podcasting. One, when you're first starting out, you need to focus on topics over guests, right? Because if you're a new podcast and unless you already like have some degree of fame, no one cares who you are and they don't really know or care who your guests are, but they care about specific topics. So I see a lot of people creating a podcast and they're trying to focus on the guest as kind of the star. And the reality is people aren't going to watch for that reason, right? So obviously if you have a famous person, like if you do a podcast with LeBron James or some actor, their name alone is going to attract attention, right? So in that case, like, hey, you just say, hey, I did a podcast with so-and-so and people are going to watch. If you're not large, like no one cares, right? So you have to be able to think about like, what are the topics that people want and how do you craft your episode to give people what they want and necessarily just what you want to create, right? Some people, we just want to get on and have a conversation about what we think is interesting. But like, if it's not interesting to your audience, your podcast is never going to grow, right? So thinking about the balance of being creative and doing what you want to do, but then also what does your audience need, right? And asking them and not just assuming. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two is like rambling and not preparing for your podcast. Like I see so many people who just set up a mic and the camera, and then they just like vomit all over the audience. You know what I mean? Where you're just talking, right? You don't really have a plan and structure. And I think I personally just don't like those, right? Where I can tell that the person didn't really plan and they're just talking. I feel like that's a waste of my time. And I'm like, you didn't do us the honor preparing for your episode. Like, you know what I mean? Why should I listen to it? So that's another big mistake. And then the third one is like downplaying themselves. Like I see some people who start a podcast and they're like insecure on the podcast. They're like, oh, like, thank y'all for watching. I know you have other episodes you could be watching. And they're like, my little podcast or like whatever. They're just kind of like downplaying it. And I'm like, you did the work, you showed up. So like show up confidently. And like, even if you have a small show, like you need to present like you're a big show because that exudes confidence and that comes through the camera and comes through the mic and makes your audience want to gravitate towards you. So like, don't be insecure. Don't be like, oh, I've never done this before and I'm shy and like, don't do all that. Right. You know what I mean? Like, let us see you and you at your best. So that's probably the third one I would say for today.
Okay, when it comes to that visual side, what are the like positives? What are the things that these are the things you need to look out for?
Yeah. Okay. So one, I would say that I actually recently just learned. I was in a course and they were kind of teaching us some podcast things. Like brandability is really important. So this is why I really love this space because I've consistently started to use this particular set. So there starts to build some familiarity with the show, right? Like in terms of people know what to expect. And so I think that's really important, just being able to have a consistent brand. Like you want your thumbnails and all your things to kind of start to look the same. So it's really important to have that visual branded component. That's really important. And like I said earlier, just like preparation is so important, and really understanding your audience, understanding the niche that you want to be in, or the niche you think you want to be in that you're testing. I think those will give you structure and then help it be a something you want to listen to. And that's actually a question I want to ask you, because I think what's really important for my podcast, I think a lot of people have really gravitated toward the quality of it, right? Just visually what it looks like. I mean, we got 4K episodes and people are like attracted to that. And like, wow, I can see like the pimples on your face, dude. Like it's so clear, right? And so like video podcasts are relatively new, you know what I mean? Most people are doing audio. So now we're kind of starting to see more video. So like, what would you say are some key components to creating like a visually attractive podcast in terms of like the video quality?
Oh man. So the first things first is like, whatever camera you have, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as the surroundings. So you got to think about light, right? So there's the background, there's the light. One of the biggest things is like I said, like the lighting equipment. So that plays a part, because with most people's skin, if the light is too harsh, it'll look blown out. But if the light is just right and it's soft, it gives the person a more lifelike appearance, so you feel like they're good in the room.
Right.
And secondly, of course, it's all about color grading. So it's like the first part is setting the scene, right? So the lights in the right place, light in the background, the ambient lighting, making sure the colors are just right. But then the last part of that is color grading. I feel like that's like the secret sauce, the superpower to anybody's podcast. Is it looks washed out or it looks too vibrant, but you get it just right.
Yeah. And that first part is so important, because you can't color grade a bad product. So that's like putting lipstick on a pig, right? So like if the raw quality still looks bad, like there's no amount of color grading that can help you. So that's another big mistake to avoid. Like that lighting piece is so important. And like if you don't have the money to get the nice lanterns and lantern lights, all that kind of stuff, like just do it in front of a window is like probably one of the biggest things. I would say though, with windows, you got to be careful though, because like if there's cloud cover and like the clouds come in front of the sun or it moves, then it's going to affect the quality of your content. So that's another thing to be thinking of. So like, a lot of people record like in like, like rooms with no windows, and just so they can manipulate the light. But I would say if you don't have that kind of situation, then like window, or what is your take on that? Do you think having windows or no windows?
Okay. So for me, of course, natural lighting can always be great, right? But if you really are on a budget and you can't afford, the nice soft lanterns, literally you can put a nice good light, pointed directly at you, but then put like a bed sheet, like a white bed sheet, on top, and then that creates like a softer light.
Okay.
And yeah, that's like a little cheat code. But I would say natural light always looks good.
Yeah.
If you know what to do in the camera. Like I said, it's the camera settings, it's the make sure the environment looks good, then it's the camera settings, then it's the lens, then after it's the color grading that makes everything just like that chef's kiss.
Yeah, and you just got to start. Like, so don't let any of this intimidate you. Like, I started off doing my podcast on Zoom, and then I transitioned to doing it on my iPhone. And then now we're in the studio and we're using Sony cameras, and we got all the fancy lenses and we got the nice lights and so all the things. So you kind of have to build up, and also just based on like what your budget is, right? So if you can start off from the beginning with having a good setup and being able to hire a team, like I have, absolutely do it, because it will save you so much time and headache making all the mistakes. But if you don't, start off with your iPhone, use cinematic mode, or learn how to play around with some of the stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like the algorithm, the way everything works is once you start, then people are going to gravitate towards you, especially if you're saying some good stuff, and then the quality, it'll pick up over time, because starting little things, right? So you start off on a phone, starting a podcast, sunlight, then you buy a light, and now the quality of that podcast just went up like another 10%.
Yeah,
simply because you bought one light.
Oh yeah.
And so, like you said, it's just the building blocks to making quality work.
Absolutely. And we're gonna have a list in the description and show notes with an Excel sheet or an Amazon list of all the products that I use for my podcast. So you'll be able to check that out. And then we'll also have a list of
starting a podcast.
And then we'll also have a link to my referral code for Riverside FM, which is a virtual podcast platform that I use that can record your content in 1080p at the basis, right? So if you want to use that, that's a great way to get a really high quality product if you're doing a virtual podcast. Or you could also use it for in person as well. But yeah, that's definitely a good resource that you can use as well.
Okay. So when it comes to what you've already put out with like podcasting, what have been the results so far? So like, what have you seen work, didn't work?
Yeah.
Really, what have you gotten from just simply starting a podcast?
Yeah, okay, so it's crazy to me because I started taking this seriously, in March? So we're in June, so about 3 months in from kinda the initial, like, "Hey, I'm gonna go all in on this thing," and so far, I have about $30,000 worth of leads in my pipeline as a result specifically of the podcast, and those are people saying yes to work with me after they saw the podcast and were like, "Yo, I wanna do something similar," or they heard, like, my expertise in marketing strategy, and they wanted to work with me on that side. So like for the whole goal for me was to start it to help grow my business, but also to build a platform. So on that front, it's been like a massive success in terms of just like the return on investment, right? And I think also like the quality of people reaching out has changed in terms of people's tone, right? In terms like they're coming to me with more thoughtful questions. They're coming to me with a better understanding of what I do and my value is. And I don't have to necessarily convince people. I think they're coming to me with kind of an already understanding of what I do, right? And that's a big blessing to me to be able to like not be convincing people like, hey, here's my value, here's what I do, right? They're kind of coming to it and they're like, hey, I see what you do. Like, what are the logistics? How do we work together? Right? It's a completely different tone. That's been a blessing to me. And I've also just been able, like, genuinely been able to bless people. Like, there's a lot of people that come on my podcast and they've never done a podcast before. They've never been on camera before. So they're always nervous. And I even had one guy who was like, hey, bro, like, how much can I pay you to not release it? Like, he was literally like, yo, don't put it out. I'll just reimburse you for the time. Right. And then I was like, bro, we're fine. We put it out. And he called me back and he was like, bro, like, I was so proud of myself. We looked amazing. And he was basically like, he was just beaming because we were able to create a quality product that he could be proud of. Right. And so that's a part of it too, is being able to empower people to like market their business effectively, talk about what they do with pride, and then be able to show them like, hey, you can do this too at a really high level. And so that's been really fun, is being able to kind of break that barrier for people and empower them. Some of my guests were like, yeah, I've always wanted to start a podcast, but I just never did it, right? And so after they come on my podcast, there's like a renewed fervor to like, okay, I can do this. Like Michael can do this, and they see my setup and they see how simple it is, and they see like what goes into it. They're like, oh yeah, I can do this, right? Because I put a lot of hard work into this, but also it's like it doesn't like you don't got to be the most like you don't got to be super intelligent, the smartest person in the room to do a really good podcast, right? And so that's kind of been the result so far, is being able to be a blessing to people, help them promote their businesses, help empower them to be a better version of themselves and show up better online, and then to show them the power of podcasting and how it can make a big difference in your life emotionally, spiritually, confidence, and financially with your business.
Oh man, the power of podcasting. That's real.
It's real, my guy. So yeah, I think what I want you guys to take away from this episode today is hopefully you have a better sense of why I'm doing what I'm doing. If you've been watching my podcast and you're kind of curious like what the backstory is, hope you're able to learn a little bit about that. If you want to know more, drop it in the comments and we'll create more content around that. If you want to know more about like the visual side of it, I know a lot of people have questions about like how do I make, what lens do I use, what camera do I use? If you have questions like that, let us know in the comments. I'll bring Khalil in and we'll get even more detail. We'll show you our setup. So yeah, just let us know what questions you guys have about podcasting. And thank y'all for watching. And feel free to check out one of our next episodes. It'll be popping up on the screen.
Peace.